So I wanted to start off by touching on a question I get frequently, and it's not like I've never answered this in my regular videos, but I know some people really like the live interaction better. But I frequently get questions every time I show anything, no matter what it is, some kind of preserved food, whether it be dehydrated eggs, usually it's the dehydrated things, dehydrated zucchini. I brought a few things in just for visual. Dehydrated roast beef. These aren't dehydrated, but they're walnuts from Azure Standard. Best walnuts ever. Best walnuts I've ever had. This is dried, cooked up pinto beans. And what else did I bring in here? And some dehydrated lemon balm. You can see the years on these, 2022, 2024, 2023. So the question I get is, how long will these things last? The most recent one was on if you're putting up, let's say, powdered milk. In fact, somebody actually asked if powdered whole milk was shelf stable. Well, yes, that's the whole point of having powdered milk in the first place, is it's supposed to be shelf stable. How shelf stable is it is going to depend on how you store it. Now, I've had little to no issues with whole milk where I have put up powdered non-fat milk before this was years ago, before I even knew that you could actually get powdered whole milk. I didn't even know it was possible. And especially being able to get it organically. And then, of course, since then, I've even dehydrated some of my own organic, well, not my own, because we don't have dairy animals, but organic whole milk. I've dehydrated it, made it own powder, tasted just like the best stuff I've ever bought from anywhere else, be it Azure Standard or some of these other places I've got organic whole milk. So the purpose is so it will be shelf stable. And how long it's going to last? Most common question I get. Well, some of it will depend on how you store it. So let's talk about these walnuts, for instance. So this is a high fat food. We know what happens to high fat sometimes in storage. It can go rancid, and nuts can be really bad at going rancid. However, the thing you can do to prevent rancidity and have your nuts last for years and years on the shelf is to vacuum seal them. This is vacuum sealed. I do find it best when I vacuum seal anything to leave it out on the counter for at least 24 hours to make sure that it was a good seal. Sometimes you might think it is, you pick it up by the lid just to find out it didn't actually seal. So, for instance, this has been back there for a year. I can still pick it up by the lid. I can push on it. There's no give to it. It's still sealed. So this is the roast beef. So this same thing will apply with any of your meats, especially if there's any fat in them. Yes, you can leave the fat in the meats. As long as you vacuum seal it, you're not going to get rancidity. And then the little trick that I found out that I was so excited about when I found out by accident. So I've made jerky for years. I've made deer jerky, beef jerky, venison jerky. I've done it for years. But, it's always chewy. That's the way jerky is. And so I decided I was going to try dehydrating turkey and chicken and kind of have the same thing. And it's chewy. It's chewy like jerky. But if you want to eat it like that, that's great. But if you try to cook with it, it doesn't rehydrate. It will always stay chewy unless you can powder it up. But what I found by accident, because I was trying to clean out my freezer and I had a whole bunch of turkey meat in there that I had frozen up, because a lot of times I'll just pack them in there, and freeze the excess meat and then use it for making, turkey a la king and other types of dishes throughout the year. And I decided I wanted to make a room in my freezer, and I just dehydrated it up and just make a chewy snack out of it. Well, because that turkey had been cooked and then frozen and then dehydrated, it came out very light and crispy, and I can use it in anything. So I started trying it with various different things. I started trying that same trick with roast beef, corned beef, chicken, fish. So the two things you can do to make that meat so that it will turn out crispy instead of chewy, so that will rehydrate well, is you either pressure cook or pressure can it and then dehydrate it, or you cook it, freeze it, then pull it out. You only have to let it thaw enough to spread it on your trays and then dehydrate it. It's great. It's great. I love it. I'm just So thrilled with this. Now, you don't have to do that with ground meats. You could try it. I haven't tried that yet, but ground meats they dehydrate up fine. You know, you're cooking them anyway, and they'll dehydrate up fine. I use ground like venison, elk, or beef when I'm making my Italian sauces, especially spaghetti sauce, and I can throw the dehydrated in there along with all the other things because I'm letting my sauce cook for a very long time. It turns out great. So that's not necessary for the ground meats, but pretty much any other meat you can do that with. And boy, it's great. It turns out just as good as freeze-dried, and you don't have to spend the money on a freeze dryer if you don't want to. If you want to, that's cool. But if you can't afford it or you don't want to, there's a little trick for you to get your dehydrated meat to turn out like freeze-dried meat. So I love it. It's an exciting thing to me. So coming back on the shelf life, people always want me to give them these exact numbers, and I really can't do that because there's too many factors in play. It's going to depend on, are your jars, if you're vacuum sealing in jars, for instance, are your jars staying sealed? If your jars aren't staying sealed, you're going to, especially if it's anything high in fat, like dehydrated eggs, for instance, or the nuts, or meat that you've left a lot of the fat in, that no, you don't have to rinse it all out as long as you vacuum seal. You leave that great flavor in there. But if it comes unsealed, it could still go rancid. But if it stays sealed, then it should last for years as long as it stays sealed. So yes, as long as it stays vacuum sealed, it should last for years. However, things with high fat, it is possible if you live in a place and you don't have any storage area where you can keep it kind of on the cooler side. I mean, it doesn't have to be cold, just on the cooler side where it's not, blazing hot. It's possible that could cause rancidity. I would not know. I would not know for certain. It would have to be something I tried to see if I vacuum sealed some high fat food into a jar and then maybe left it in my living room for a year next to the wood stove or something. So if anybody has experience in that, that lives in a place you don't have air conditioning, it gets really hot, you don't have a good place to store things like that where it can stay on the cooler side, please share what have been your experiences. I've been gifted more elk. Any tips? Freezing, cooking and dehydrating, like I was talking about, cooking, freezing, dehydrating, or canning. I do all three with the meats. Freezing, you can it's really tricky with freezing, finding something that is as toxin-free as possible to wrap the meat in. But I do suggest, if you don't want to have the extra layer of plastic, of getting a good, I always want to say freezer paper. Is it freezer paper or butcher paper? One of them that's got a coating on the inside. I'm not going to say that coating is entirely safe, but you can get away with wrapping up the cuts in just the paper without that extra layer of plastic on the inside. It's all a matter of how you wrap it. One of these days I'm going to do a video, but basically I'll have my freezer paper or butcher paper, whichever one. I wish I could remember what it is off the top of my head. And I'll put it, usually, it's kind of cut more of in a square, and I'll put the meat at this corner like this, and then I'll wrap that corner over, roll it a couple times, then wrap the other corners in, fold those in, and then finish rolling it, and then just slap a piece of tape on there. And that works really good. I've had meat last for years and years in my freezer without getting freezer burnt, wrapped just like that. I've got elk in there. I'm still trying to work through. That's probably about 3 years old, and it's still good.